Yo guys, back to the channel, and for those of you who already have experienced and love the Redmagic 10 Pro, well, there are still main takeaways here. In the 10s Pro, the form of abundant performance, improved cooling, and finally an official IP certification. The 10s Pro just dropped in the global market and its price is increased by €50, with the base starting at $699 for the 12 gigs to 156 gig storage variants. It only comes in the matte black finish cover though. Then there's Dusk and Moonlight, one is black, the other silver, both with 16 and 512 gigs. This time the Moonlight Silver also has a 24 gig 1TB option. Last time model was limited just to Dusk. These variants haven't jumped up in price and still cost $999, so other than the top model you're paying $50 more for what looks and feels just like the previous iteration. In all fairness though, there was no price hike from the 9 series to the 10 series, but surely there are some changes here. Well, its dimensions and ways are exactly the same, but its back design isn't a complete copy-paste. There's less cuts around the X logo, less visible screws, less text. Some writing has moved and lines are a bit different, but the LED placements are the same. The X logo, Redmagic logo, cooling fan and touch triggers also, they light up. But now, which is probably my favorite thing about this device, you can enable something called lighting mode, so you can keep the lights on all the time, even when logged. Then you can toggle them on or off if the controls enter again. The 10 Pro was already a stunner, so I do see why they wouldn't want to change much here. I do appreciate these little refinements though. The aviation aluminum side rails are still flat, the display is still flat with the exact same 6.85-inch AMOLED panel, 144Hz refresh rate, 2500Hz touch sampling rate, 2000 nits brightness, the same immersive 95.3 screen to body ratio with the same tiny bezels and under display camera for the emotions of experience, which you honestly won't get from any other phone. But the selfie camera is left untouched. We still get the same 60 megapixel with selfie at 250 and a 2 megapixel macro sensor. The back is also still completely flat with all the rear cameras still tucked behind the glass back again. This isn't something I'd want them to change. Having everything flat and immersive is what made the 10 Pro such a great phone. Alright, so first big change here is that the Snapdragon logo on the backplate is actually a bit different, written under its leading version, which means it's an overclocked version of the 8 Elite chipset. The 2 prime cores have been bumped up to 4.47 GHz instead of 4.32, and the GPU now runs at 1200 MHz instead of 1100. Its benchmark scores are actually higher than other phones. They're also higher than a 10 Pro, but not by much. There's still LPDDR5 and a dedicated gaming chip, which is baked with AI and is called the Redcore R3 Pro, which still does the same thing. Enhanced performance and effects while taking some of the load off the Qualcomm chip, and since there are more brains behind it, the battery efficiency should be a bit too. Speaking of the battery capacity, it is still the same and is still massive at 7500 mAh, but for some reason charging is up to 80 watts instead of 100 watts, but things should be kept cooler because there's the next big upgrade. We still get a physical cooling fan which runs at the same 23,000 thrusts per minute. The vapor chamber is now large, but the main improvement is liquid metal 2.0, which has increased in size, offers more thermal conductivity and move to directly above the CPU, which just makes sense by moving. Its CPU temps have dropped by 5 degrees and the softening points has dropped from 60 to 50 degrees Celsius. Don't stress about the term liquid though. Just like with the 10 Pro, they have processed the solid state piece, so it's liquid solid metal. Speaking of liquid, the phone is now officially IP54 rated, which means that it's protected and can survive water splashes. That's a pretty impressive upgrade considering it has exposed areas for the fan. So I guess you don't have to worry as much if it starts raining during your outdoor gaming session. Let's not forget though, this phone is all about gaming. There is still a Redmagic key on the side and by default flicking. The switch answers game mode, but you can customize it to a few other things. My preference is using it as a mute switch. If you don't use it as a GameSpace switch, you can just as easily open GameSpace from the control center in GameSpace. You can still customize things the way you could before, and once you hop into a game, you can still access the same useful gaming features. I couldn't really find many new features, but existing features have been more refined and supported. More games will still have an upscaling and frame interpolation feature, which lets you play 60 frames per second games like ESPS. It's not true 120 frames per second gaming, but it definitely feels smoother, strangely enough. It doesn't seem as stable as it did on the 10 Pro with frame rates jumping between 100 and 120. Of course, if you disable this feature, we'll still get a rock-solid 60 frames per second on average, which is no real surprise. And you can still customize the touch triggers in multiple different ways, but single tap is still my go-to. They offer the same 520Hz response rates. As before, you can also use the frame into ablation feature in Wuthering Waves, which is an even more demanding game to play. And it averaged 120 frames per second with the feature enabled and 60 frames per second with it disabled, which is a slight step up from the 10 Pro. It's worth mentioning that the game now has its own frame generation feature for 120 frames per second anywhere. The good news is that the device never felt too hot while playing and was significantly cooler than the 10 Pro, which sat at around 64 degrees Celsius in Wuthering Waves. I guess their new cooling structure has made success. It has no FPS limit, so the phone averaged 144 PS just like we saw with its predecessor, but unlike the 10 Pro, the 10s Pro can now finally run Call of Duty Mobile at a native 144 Hz. Refresh rates up from the 120 frames per second cap that we saw last time out. And since the USB 3.2 port still doubles up as a display port, we can still hook up an external monitor for 4K 144 Hz gaming, and the phone is still more than powerful enough to run two games simultaneously, one on a monitor and one on the phone screen. The speakers are the same too, and they're still fantastic. We'll still get a headphone jack, and then IR blaster, and then NFC for tap to pay. The optical fingerprint sensor is still just okay, but since this is the global version, we still get Google Gemini, but unfortunately there is still no Google Discover and no Circle to Search. Running on Redmagic OS 10.5 slept over Android 15 and its side identical to before, there's no option for large folders, which sucks, but other than a few interesting interactive widgets, the UI is generally quite stock. Like there's also a few AI features, if that's something you care about. So well, I can't really recommend the Redmagic 10s Pro to those of you who already own a Redmagic 10 Pro actually. Even if you don't own a 10 Pro though, I'd only recommend this if you tend to splash your phone with water and want slightly improved performance though. I would say it's worth spending the extra money if you want better cooling, because they have seriously worked some magic into this cooling system. I'm pretty happy that they've stuck to the same winning formula though, because the Redmagic 10 Pro was already such a good smartphone. Anyway, that's it guys, for you gamers especially. Hope you liked the video. If so, please like it. And kindly consider subscribing, as it comes free for you, but it helps my channel. Until the next one, take good care of yourselves and each other. See ya.